begin, let me just talk to you about this. Not him, but this, the scepter. That which he holds in his hand, which represents the power and the authority of the United Kingdom in the hands of King Charles. Now, when we talk about the history of the scepter, it actually dates back far, far into human history, back into ancient times. And the scepter, which again is a symbol of authority, actually evolved from this, a shepherd's staff. This right here. Something that you could expect to see just about anywhere in the world among those who are tending sheep and goats. And in ancient cultures, this thing here eventually symbolized leadership and authority and power. And if you think about it, this in the hands of a shepherd is quite a tool. We know from the life of David that something like this could be a weapon. If you've ever seen Annika Van Buren, or now Annika, not Van Buren, Annika Johnson. Yeah, sorry, Blake. All right. Annika Johnson hold a staff. It could be a weapon. And a shepherd could take it and try to, keep the sheep, in line there, right? If a sheep tries to get over a cliff or something, the shepherd might come out and quickly grab that sheep with the hook there and bring it back in. And because of the use of the staff, it evolved into a symbol. The ancient Greeks called it the skeptron. And this is actually a Greek scepter / staff that's in the Cairo Museum, dating back to the time of the Greeks. The Romans would use it as well as a symbol of authority. And what's interesting with the Romans is at the top of their scepter, or the top of the staff scepter, they would often have a golden eagle. And so we can see this in various museums around the world, how these scepters or these staffs were used as symbols of power. But long before Greece, long before Rome, long before the British Empire, the ancient Egyptians had adopted the staff as a symbol of their power and their authority. Now, they had different kinds. One of them was this. We probably all recognize this from King Tut's tomb. All right, we have the scepter and the flail, right? These were used, again, as symbols of their kingship. And they also have what was known as the Waz scepter, which is there. There's one in the museum. And the Waz scepter looked like a staff, but the end was like some sort of an animal, a bird or a crocodile or something like that. That was also a symbol. And this became, again, not just a symbol of authority, but it became a symbol of the gods in ancient Egypt. So I'll show you this slide, which comes from the Book of the Dead in the British Museum. And what we have here is we have, and some of you have seen this before, we have a depiction of what they believed in Egyptian theology happened after you died. Your soul would go down into their version of Hades, and here you would be met by Osiris. Osiris is the god of the underworld. It's the god of a lot of things, actually, in ancient mythology, Egyptian mythology. But here we have the soul of the person who is coming before, I don't know if it's that person or that person, but either way, they're coming before Osiris and the underworld, and their heart has been placed on the scales to be weighed, to see how they did in life. And Osiris felt that they passed. That was test one. Test two was that they would then have to go and walk through this group of gods. These are all gods in ancient Egypt, who then, kind of like a courtroom, would be like, innocent, guilty, guilty, innocent. And if you passed all of that, good news. You get to go to their version of heaven, all right? I'm simplifying this, of course. But notice what all the gods have. All the gods have a staff. And why is that? Because that is a symbol of their power. It's a symbol of their authority. I want us to observe how this plays out. Before I do that, here, I actually have a slide of an ancient staff. Check that out. Okay, not as straight as mine. Guess they didn't have machine tools back in those days. All right, but that is an ancient staff from the ancient Near East. Pharaoh, by the way, this was at the entrance to King Tut's tomb, and this is also supposed to be King Tut. All right, they had this weird belief in ancient Egypt that this little statue that was at the entrance to King Tut's tomb, that after he died and after his funeral and all of the rites were accomplished, his soul would then go into the statue for safekeeping. Kind of weird stuff. But anyway, notice what he's got. He's got a staff. Okay, so that's the staff. Now, I wanted to see how this plays out in this very well-known conflict between Moses and Pharaoh. So let me read this to you. This occurs in the book of Exodus, chapter 7. Then Yahweh the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, when Pharaoh says to you, prove yourself by working a miracle, then you shall say to Aaron, take your staff, and cast it down before Pharaoh, that it may become a serpent. So Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and did just as the Lord commanded. Aaron cast down his staff before Pharaoh and his servants, and it became a serpent. Then Pharaoh summoned the wise men and their sorcerers, and they, the magicians of Egypt, also did the same by their secret arts. Each man cast down his staff, and they became serpents. But Aaron's staff swallowed up their staff. Still, Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he would not listen to them, as the Lord had said. Now, the significance of this event, of course, is not that these staffs turned into snakes. There's a lot of argument out there about whether this was actually some sort of miracle performed by Satan, or if this was some sort of trickery. It doesn't really matter, honestly. I mean, I think the former. I think there's a lot of evidence there that this was again a miracle that was performed, God giving Satan the power to do that. But what is significant is that God's staff swallowed their staffs, or his serpents swallowed their serpents, therefore showing that God is more powerful than the gods of Egypt. That's what's going on. So with this in mind, this idea of the history of the staff, the significance of it within the Egyptian culture, the ancient Near East at this time, let's begin by looking at our text this morning. So I will begin by reading in verse 1. It says, and the people of Israel, the whole congregation, came into the wilderness of Zin in the first month, and the people stayed in Kadesh, and Miriam died there and was buried there. I encourage you to follow this in your Bibles. If you have a bulletin, it's printed right in the front. You can follow along. And this verse 1 of this narrative is important because it provides the context. It provides the background of what's going on here. Moses just lost his sister Miriam. How many people have watched a movie or a television series based on the Exodus? Anybody? And you've seen however Hollywood wants to depict the first time that Moses meets Miriam. I'm always disappointed in whatever scene they come up with, because I think it must have been amazing. Here is a man who comes back to his family after 80 years and meets the sister who helped save his life. They're older. This isn't, if you follow the book of Acts and you follow the story of Moses, he's not a young whippersnapper when he meets Miriam. He's older. What a reunion that must have been. And here we find out at the beginning of chapter 20 that she has just died. His sister, the very girl that had watched over him as a baby. And what was she doing the last 40 years of his life? She was helping him in leadership in some ways. Look, this is what we read. We read, I don't have the slide. All right, that's okay. We read this in Exodus. It says, Miriam the prophetess, the sister of Aaron, took a tambourine in her hand and led the people in worship. In one verse, we have two very interesting descriptions of Miriam. A, she's a prophetess, and B, she's leading worship. So she's helping Moses. She's helping Moses, his very own sister. What a nice team they must have made. Now, not everything was smooth sailing. There are times when Miriam called out Moses and there was some conflict that they had to work out. But for the most part, this brother and sister team spent a lot of time and a lot of precious moments together over 40 years, and she just died. How do you think Moses is feeling? If you've lost someone, you know how he's feeling. Last night, we gathered together at my mom's house, had a little mini family reunion since my sister Cindy's here from New Mexico. And we watched the memorial service, the slideshow presentation, that had been made at my dad's funeral. And brought back memories, didn't it? A lot of memories as we looked over his life again. So I know, because I've been there, what it's like to lose someone, and Moses is grieving. He's grieving. And what else do we learn from this verse? The Bible tells us that they stayed in Kadesh. They were in Kadesh. Now, that's important, because Kadesh is as close as you can get to the promised land without being in it. Let me show you a slide. First of all, I love maps, and I love this map. Whoever, this is several hundred years old, but it's a beautiful map. Beautiful color, beautiful. And when I zoom in on the lower part of it, or you know what, that's kind of, if you look at the screen back there, look at the color. See, it's a little more, robust than we get on this kind of muted projector. But if I zoom in on the lower part of the map, see this? That's Kadesh, or Kadesh. That's also known as Kadesh Barnea. You may have read that. Look how close they are. I mean, they're just so close. Best way of describing this is that Michigan is the promised land, and they're in Michigan City, Indiana. They're almost there. And Miriam dies. They're just waiting for the Lord to go, enter. They're ready. So close. Moses is on the doorstep of the promised land. It's been a long 40 years. His sister just died. And what happens? The people start to grumble. Now there was no water for the congregation, and they assembled themselves together against Moses and against Aaron, and the people quarreled with Moses and said, "Would that we had perished when our brothers perished before the Lord. Why have you brought the assembly of the Lord into this wilderness, that we should die here, both we and our cattle?" Okay, look at, having no water in the desert is a fair complaint. I mean, that's a fair complaint. I don't need to show you slides of the desert. You know this is a tough environment. I mean, in Kadesh Barnea, the average daytime temperature is 104 degrees Fahrenheit. It's hot. Rainfall is less than 8 inches a year. There are wells nearby. There's an underground water stream, actually, there. That's why they're there. But it wasn't sufficient. Maybe it was running dry. Maybe it ran dry. Maybe they had been there long enough. The wells are empty. I don't know. But here they are complaining. They're thirsty. And this is where they fail. They fail as a people because they didn't come to God with their complaint. They came to Moses with their complaint, and they blamed him. They could have gathered in prayer, they petitioned God, but instead they choose to take issue with Moses. Because you know what? It was far easier to complain to Moses than to come to prayer to God. Human nature, I guess. Listen to their complaint again. Would that we had perished when our brothers perished before the Lord. Why have you brought us into this wilderness that we should die here, both we and our cattle? You've got to be kidding me. First, they accused Moses of leading them into the desert to die. And then they go so far as to wish they had died with their brothers. When they say that we had perished with their brothers, they're referring back to Numbers chapter 16. When 3 leaders and 250 of their followers rebelled against Moses. And God caused an earthquake. And it opened up. And all of those 3 leaders and 250 of their followers were consumed by the earth. The Bible tells us that the people of Israel witnessed. They heard the cries and the screams of the people as the earth swallowed them and they went down into Hades. Listen to what the Bible says in chapter 16. Look at this. So they and all that belonged to them went down alive into Sheol, and the earth closed over them, and they perished from the midst of the assembly. And these people have the audacity to say to Moses, "Oh, if we just could have been with them and perished." What a stupid thing to say. And then they go on and they say, "Why did you, Moses, bring us up out of Egypt?" Okay, I'm going to be honest with you. I'm starting to get irritated with these Israelites, okay? First of all, Moses just lost his sister. We know the timeline of chapter 20. This had to have occurred shortly thereafter, really soon. Moses and Aaron, because Aaron is a brother as well, the 2 brothers are mourning their sister when this happens. Come on, people. Can you at least let them finish their mourning before you show up there and start complaining to them? And secondly, these people never even lived in Egypt. It was their parents who lived in Egypt, not them. Man, and their parents were complainers too. Did they forget that in Egypt, Hebrew babies were brutally murdered? Did they forget that in Egypt the parents lived as slaves and were whipped and humiliated and oppressed? Oh, sure. It would have been so much more preferable to live there than go into a land flowing with milk and honey. They're just complaining. And they're being stupid. Let's look at verse 5. Why have you, Moses, made us come out of Egypt to bring us to this evil place? It is no place for grain or figs or vines or pomegranates, and there is no water to drink. We're in the desert. Where's the grain, Moses? Where are the figs, Moses? Where are the vines? Where are the pomegranates? Wow. Now, if you know anything about me, you who are regular attenders here at Grace, you know that my expertise is biblical geography. And this whole book that I'm writing, one of my hidden objectives is to bring that out in my chapters so that people become attuned to asking the question where when they're reading the Bible. And so look at, when I read this, Jonathan Schuster reads this and says, "Why have you made us come out of Egypt to bring us to this evil place?" Woo, my antennas go up. Evil place. Why is this an evil place? Well, let's dig in a little bit to what Kadesh Barnea is. This isn't the first time that the Israelites had been to Kadesh Barnea. If you want to look at the first time they've been to Kadesh Barnea, go back to Numbers chapter 13, verse 26. This is the first time they were there. Check this out. At the end of 40 days, the spies returned from spying out the land, and they came to Moses and Aaron, to all the congregation of the people of Israel in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. They brought back word to them and to all the congregation and showed them the fruit of the land, vines, pomegranates, all those things they just complained they don't have. And they told them, "We came to the land to which you sent us. It flows with milk and honey. And look, this is its fruit. However, the people who dwell in the land are strong, and the cities are fortified and very large, a land that devours its inhabitants." And all the people of Israel grumbled. Oh, here they go. They grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The whole congregation said, "Would that we had died in the land of Egypt, or would that we died in the wilderness. Would it not be better for us to go back to Egypt? And they said to one another, let us choose a leader and go back to Egypt. That's what their parents did when they first arrived at Kadesh the first time. When the spies brought back, guess what? Figs and grain and vines and pomegranates. And here the people are in verse 5 are complaining to Moses going, this evil place here, it doesn't even have these things. That's right. It doesn't. But if your parents had been faithful, if they had been obedient, if they had just trust the Lord their God, you wouldn't be here. You would be there in the land that has vines and pomegranates and is a land flowing with milk and honey. But no, we had to wander 40 years because of their sin, and here you are, their children, come back to the same place, and here you are grumbling just like they did. Man. Moses is getting ticked off. Now let me tell you something. Why is it that they want to blame Moses? It's not Moses' fault. But here they are. They want to blame somebody, so they blame him because they're thirsty. I have a granddaughter. She's 3 months. And she cries a lot. My poor son and my daughter-in-law, Emma, just the other day, Becky was watching Madeline, and she said she just cried and cried and cried. And I thought, oh, poor Andrew and Emma. They're probably walking around in a stupor because they're tired. Some of you moms in here, like, you know what I'm talking about, right? This is challenging times when you have a baby. And they're just crying and crying and crying and crying, and it wears you down. And I'm telling you what, the Israelites are acting like babies. They're whining and crying, and Moses is like, I just lost my sister. Would you please give me a break? But they blame him. Hey, guess what, Israelites? It wasn't Moses that led you into the desert. It was the Lord your God who led you. Certainly Moses did some amazing things, but it's still God who led you. So by looking to Moses instead of to God, they do three things. Number one, they slander God's name. Number two, they steal God's glory. And number three, they fail to recognize his sovereignty in their life. Do we ever do this? Do we ever steal God's glory or fail to recognize his sovereignty in our lives? Do we? Now, it's going to start to get sticky. Verse 6. Then Moses and Aaron went from the presence of the assembly to the entrance of the tent of meeting and fell on their faces. And the glory, the Shekinah glory of the Lord appeared to them. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, take your staff. Take your staff. And assemble the congregation, you and Aaron your brother, and tell the rock before their eyes to yield its water. Why does he say take the staff? Because it says right here that he is going to speak to the rock. You shall bring water out of the rock for them and give them drink for the congregation and their cattle. And so Moses took the staff before the Lord as he commanded him. The staff, according to God's plan here, isn't going to do anything. He just says, bring it. Bring it. Why? Because what is this? In the eyes of the Israelites, look at it. They're living in the ancient Near East, in the culture. Egypt's their southern neighbor. They live in a time in world history when this represents divine authority and power. And so God says, bring the staff, a picture that this of my authority into the scene and then speak to the rock so that the people will see my staff, because it's called the staff of Yahweh many, many times throughout the book of Numbers and in the Pentateuch. Raise up my staff and speak to them, and the people will see that the authority that I have as God Almighty is given to the situation, and water will come out of the rock, and everybody will be not fed, but have the water they need to drink. That's what you are to do, Moses. Now look, Moses and Aaron start off right. They do the right thing because they go to God. They said, Lord, what do we do? And they plead to God on behalf of the people. We have this beautiful picture of spiritual leadership right here. Beautiful. They're doing exactly what leaders are supposed to do. And that's what we do here as leaders here at Grace. We pray for you. We gather as elders and deacons, and if there is an urgent prayer, we pray for that, and then we pray generally for you. That's what leaders are supposed to do. And yet sometimes the very people who serve the church are the ones who get beaten up. Being a leader is not for the faint-hearted. It requires a lot of patience. And that's just something Moses doesn't have right now. He starts off really well. Like I said, he goes to the Lord. He appeals to the Lord. He asks the Lord what to do. And the Lord tells him what to do. So he starts off well, but then it goes south from there. So amazing how quickly things can change. We do the right thing in one moment, and then, wow, the next moment we're sinning like you wouldn't believe. Sound familiar? Check this out. I wish this verse was not in the Bible. Then Moses and Aaron gathered the assembly together before the rock, and he said to them, "Here now, you rebels, shall we bring water for you out of this rock?" Wow. Moses is going to regret this, as so often we do after we lose our cool. How many of you have said things you wish you would not have said when you were angry? Anybody here? Moses is angry. And he says, "Here now, you rebels." Well, that builds community. That's a nice way to get everybody to calm down. You know, from the time of Christ up until 1950, he would have called them moros. That's the Greek word for foolish, from which we get our word moron. If Moses had lived in the 1950s, he would have called them dimwits. In the 1960s, he would have called them airheads. I'm enjoying this way too much, by the way. In the 1970s, he would have called them dorks. Anybody remember dorks? 1980s, boy, this seems a lot older than 1980s, but I looked it up. He would have called them dweebs. Hey, you dweebs. I love the 1990s. Moses would have said, "What's wrong with you? Were you hit by an idiot stick?" Anybody remember that? Remember the idiot stick? Oh, and my favorite. If Moses were Irish, he just would have said, "You Egypts. You Egypts." Look, if someone is accusing you and blaming you, what should be your first move? You insult them. Yeah, call them names. The Bible not only teaches us what we ought to do, it also teaches us what we ought not to do. And if you think this is bad, look at what he does, what he says next. He says, "Shall we bring water for you out of this rock?" And I'm pretty sure that the moment he said "we," all the angels watching went, "Ooh, somebody's in trouble." Psalm 106, verse 33 tells us that, and I quote, "Rash words came from Moses' lips." Yep, absolutely. That's an understatement. And if you think what he says is bad, whoa, look at what he does. Verse 11. "And Moses lifted up his hand, and he struck the rock with his staff twice. And water came out abundantly, and the congregation drank, and their livestock." Wow, Moses, Failure, big time. For starters, he draws attention to himself and Aaron instead of drawing attention to God. And then he doesn't obey God. He's supposed to speak to the rock, but instead he speaks to the people, calling them names. And then he calls them rebels, which is ironic because right now he is being a rebel. Rebel comes from the Greek word morim, which is the nominal form of the word mora, which is used 45 times in the Old Testament. In all but 5, it means to rebel against God. It means to be disobedient or to provoke. Well, what do you think Moses is doing right now? Exactly what he just called the Israelites. And here as a leader, Moses had a chance to teach the people, and instead he leads them into even more sin. And he offends God's holiness. That's what he does. And he does so with one particularly wicked sin. He takes the staff of Yahweh and he strikes the rock. Not once, but twice. Why do you think he struck it twice? Just give me this has now suddenly become an interactive sermon. Why do you think he struck it twice? Anybody? Yeah. Anger? For sure. What else? What's that? Yeah, are you talking about the first time that back in Exodus when he encountered the rock? We'll get there in a second. You know what? It's so obvious. What, did I miss one? Who? Jesse? Tongue, cat got your tongue? Ah, Jesse! Oh, words come out of the mouth of babes. Yes, exactly. He struck the rock, boom, and nothing happened. Because God didn't say strike the rock, did he? God said speak to the rock. But he didn't do it. So what does he do? He strikes it again. I have a feeling that he would have kept striking it until he got what he wanted. He only had to do it twice. First time didn't work. So he struck it again. Twice. And then water came pouring out. Oh, wow. Do you see what he did? He disobeyed God. He didn't speak. Instead, he took that staff and he struck the rock as though this staff that he's holding in his hand had some sort of magical power. He used that staff like it was some sort of a talisman. Why would he do that? Well, you know what? Let's talk about Moses for a minute. Where did Moses grow up? Say it. Egypt. What was his position there? He was a prince. Read the book of Acts, and it tells us a little bit about Moses' history, that he was raised as a prince in Egypt. You know, all you got to do is study Egyptian history to find out what that meant for a prince to be trained and educated. Moses was probably the most well-educated person in the land. He would have had personal advisors, tutors. He would have learned about warfare. He would have learned about politics. He would have learned about economics. He would have learned about engineering. And he would have learned about Egyptian theology. And of course, what is the staff in Egypt? It's a symbol of power. It's a symbol of authority. And Moses has this in his hand. And where all he has to do is speak to the rock and give God the glory. Instead, out of anger, he strikes the rock, falling into a moment of idolatry. Like an Egyptian pharaoh would do. In that moment, Moses was acting more like Pharaoh than he was a servant of the Lord. And he says, must we bring water from this rock? Must we? Wow. Let me ask you, what do you think that meant? When he said we, who's the we? Anybody? Moses and Aaron? What's another possibility? A royal we, or me and God. Let me ask you, when he says, must we bring water out of the rock, whether Moses is referring to himself and Aaron, himself and God, or just, does it really make a difference? Because whatever way you look at it, however you want to interpret it, it's still a sin. Moses is still elevating himself. And when he does this, he does something very, very bad. And how does God respond? First, by showing himself to be holy, he causes water to come out from the rock. And we read that the community and their livestock drank. And then he's also merciful. Because I'll tell you what, all you have to do is read the Old Testament to discover that God killed some people for a lot less than that. He spares Moses' life. He could have killed him on the spot. How dare you, Moses, replace me as the God of my people? How dare you treat that staff like it's some sort of Egyptian staff of power? Or elevate you like you're Pharaoh in the eyes of the people? How dare you? And so we get these verses. And the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, because you did not believe in me to uphold me as holy in the eyes of the people of Israel, therefore you will not bring these people into the land that I have given them. And then we get the concluding verse of that narrative. These are the waters of Meribah where the people of Israel quarreled with the Lord, and through them he showed himself to be holy. It's a sad moment in Moses' life for sure. And yet God is able to use this moment to teach a valuable lesson. He reveals that he's righteous, that he will not tolerate unbelief, sin, distrust, ingratitude, and he especially will not tolerate idolatry. And then we get this beautiful verse. And on that day, the Lord showed himself to be holy. One of the things that I love to do in the classroom when I'm teaching my students in the Old Testament is to stop for a minute and say, now let's read this passage Christologically. That means Christ-focused. You should do that, by the way. When you read your Old Testament, you should do that. You should read it, think about the past, the history, what's going on, the place, the interaction, the characters. Ask the question, how is God the hero of the text? All of these things you should do when you're reading the Old Testament. And then after you've done that, read it again with a Christ focus. What does this teach me about Jesus? How is Jesus seen in the text? And this one's quite interesting because you see, this is not the first time, Corey Farrell, that the people of Israel came across a rock. Back in Exodus, when they got to Mount Horeb, they complained because there was no water. And God said to Moses, go out and strike the rock, and it'll bring forth water. That's what you were referring to. So he does. He goes out there and he strikes the rock, and water comes out, and they have what they need. So why in Numbers chapter 20 does God say, speak to the rock? Go to the New Testament, the Bible tells us the rock is Christ. Christ only needed to be struck once. He should not be struck twice. He only needed to be spoken to the second time for them to receive what they needed from him. And yet Moses took it upon himself to slip into a moment of Egyptian idolatry, and he struck the rock twice. I think God was angry too at that moment. All right, let's talk about application. The first one I would like to direct to the leaders in our room. Whether you're an elder, a deacon, a Sunday school teacher, a small group leader, whatever, to those who are leaders in our room, this is number one. Exercise your leadership with wisdom. God is reminding us this morning that leaders are going to be held accountable for their words and their deeds. And every leader in this church, whatever your role, let me challenge you to do what you do for the glory of Christ, never for your own. A healthy leader knows who the true shepherd is. And nowhere is that more true than the pastor. If Moses were here today and you said to Moses, "Hey Moses, what was the dumbest thing you ever did?" He'd say, "I can answer that in a millisecond. It was at Kadesh Barnea when I struck the rock. What a dumb thing. Boy, I wish I could take that back." And then leaders, notice the very last verse of our passage when it says, "These are the waters of Meribah where the people of Israel quarreled with the Lord." Wait a minute. I thought they were quarreling with Moses. You know what the Lord says? When you quarrel with my anointed, you quarrel with me. So if you come to me and you're complaining, and I mean you're really complaining, I mean you're letting me have it, don't be surprised if I say, "Hey, you know what? I can handle this. But just stop right there. Why don't you come back after you've prayed about this, because your quarrel really isn't with me. Your quarrel's with the Lord." Unless, of course, I've done something really stupid, then I suppose it is with me. When you're serving the Lord faithfully, you're doing his will, you're doing his work. Let me tell you something, others will rise against you. They will. Guaranteed. But remember, leaders, it's not just you that they're assaulting. So learn from Moses. Let the Lord fight his own battles. Don't do anything rash. Calling people scumbags or dweebs or Egypts is not going to help the situation. It's not going to promote healing or unity. If you need to vent to the Lord, he can handle it. The Lord can take care of his own battles. This whole episode in Numbers 20 is sad. I mean, if you study Moses' life, there are so many times when he faced obstacle. And what did he do? He ran to the Lord. And the Lord always took care of it. But this occasion, and again, I do think he was in a bad frame of mind with his sister just passing away. He was at a weak moment. He failed. Big time. Come on, haven't you ever read this episode and asked yourself this question? Look, all he did was strike the rock. That's enough to not let him enter the land? Haven't you ever wondered and go, that seems rather harsh, God? Now you know. It's a little more complicated than that. Because he went full on into idolatry and grabbed the glory for himself, the power for himself, and removed God from the equation. And God said, don't you ever do that again. And because you did that, you will not enter the land. Oh my, that is a harsh, harsh punishment. But hey, Moses, God could have killed you on the spot, so, could have been worse. You know, it only takes one decision to change your life. One decision. Becky and I were in Los Angeles. You guys know that. I think you know that. We were in Los Angeles. Becky's parents had their 60th wedding anniversary. We gathered around his family and poked fun at them. It also celebrated them at the same time. It was a great family moment to celebrate his 60th wedding anniversary. But our flight back from L.A. went from L.A. to Las Vegas to Grand Rapids. We had a stopover. Picked up my sister on the way. It was kind of funny. We met her at the airport. She didn't know. She was coming from Albuquerque to Las Vegas to Grand Rapids, and we were coming from Los Angeles to Las Vegas, and we met in Las Vegas, and she didn't know that. It was a surprise. We decided to have a little fun with her. So she's walking through the airport, and I walked up behind her, and I said, "Hey, you look just like my sister." And she went, She looked at the guy next to him. She thought he was talking. She went, well, she looked around like, who's talking to me? And then she saw me, and she kind of giggled for a second. And it took a little, it takes the mind a second to catch up. And she's like, what? What are you doing here? It was kind of fun. But anyway, we got on the plane, and the stewardess says, this was in L.A., going to Las Vegas. How many people are going to Vegas to get married? And then there's a couple up in the front, And I'm thinking, oh, boy. How many people go to Vegas to get married? One decision can affect your life forever. I think there's a lot of people who have done that, regret that. Number 2, do not blame others for your sin. Listen closely, church. I'm talking to you. Don't blame others for your sin. I want to take you to an interesting verse you probably have overlooked. Maybe you've never even read it, because it's in the book of Deuteronomy, and Deuteronomy isn't exactly the most riveting book for people if you're looking for a little spiritual high. And it comes right at the very beginning. Do you know what the book of Deuteronomy is? The book of Deuteronomy is basically one long sermon. Here's Moses at the end of his life. The people are about to enter the promised land under Joshua, and he is going to go over and die. Basically, God says, give him one last powerful message, Puritan style, which means they were there for a long time. And so he goes and delivers the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 1, the very beginning, his introduction to his one long message. What does he say? Look at what he says. He says, hey, because of you, the Lord became angry with me and said, you shall not enter it. That's the promised land either. Beginning of his message and his introduction, he blames them for what's about. I'm going to go over there and die, and guess what? It's your fault. And he does that 3 times in the book of Deuteronomy. Yep. He also does it again in chapter 3, verse 26, and he does it again in 420. 3 times in the book of Deuteronomy. He blames them. Moses. That's not how God sees it. In Numbers chapter 20, we just read it. God said to Moses, because you did this, Moses, you will not enter the promised land. Do not blame others for your sin. The Lord doesn't buy it. Your sin is your sin alone. I have met so many people when counseling who want to point the finger at the other person. So let me just preempt it. If you're going to come to me for counseling, don't point the finger at the other person. Because you might see my eyes roll, and sometimes it happens. Ask Sarah Cameraman. Sometimes my eyes roll involuntarily, and I get myself in trouble. Number 3, last. Let the Lord show himself to be holy in and through your life. Look, we all face difficulties in our lives. Sometimes they come from within, and sometimes they come from without, like our workplace. And sometimes they even come from within the church. Boy, if you hear nothing else this morning, hear this. Look it. When something doesn't go well here at Grace Church of Hamilton, you can either complain about it, you can gossip about it, or check this out. You can contribute to the solution. You can make our church better. No matter which direction you turn, conflict in life is inevitable. I mean, you're going to have desert experiences. You will. Kids, sorry, you will. And such moments can either bring out the best in you or the worst in you. You can either mature through them or make them worse. Give the Lord a chance to show himself holy. in your desert experiences. I wonder if the Apostle James was thinking about Moses when he wrote this. Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds, for you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. And let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given him. But let him ask in faith, with no doubting. Blessed is the man who remains steadfast under trial, for when he has stood the test, he will receive the crown of life. God desires that we mature, that we continue to be transformed into the image of his Son. And the joy of it all is that he doesn't give up on us when we fail. He doesn't. Mother Teresa once said, true holiness consists in doing God's will with a smile, even when others are against you. Wow, well said. God always gets the last word, and the last word in Numbers chapter 20 is that he will show himself holy among the people. Let's stand up and sing together in response.